Okay, number two, Ian A. Little says, I've seen a worrying uptick in anti-Semitism on the right lately, and I'm not even talking about the alt-right. Why do you think this is, and how can we fight it? It may be true that some thinkers behind leftist ideologies like communism were Jewish, but it's also true that other Jewish thinkers were influential in shaping modern conservatism as well, so I don't understand where they get the idea that there's some kind of vast conspiracy going on. We noticed it too, Ian. Scott noticed it. Scott has been just unbelievable how much Scott has done around here lately. And Scott reads pretty much every YouTube comment, and he's seeing a definite increase in it. I think since you asked for an explanation, I think you're pretty much right on the pulse of it. As the society becomes more and more polarized, and as we get more and more alarmed about watching things slip away, I think it's easy for people to hear things like American Jews vote overwhelmingly for Democrats, which is a mystery to me. And I had that conversation earlier today with an employee of ours who's Jewish, and she can't understand it, and I can't understand it either. But there it is. And while it is true also that that the Bolsheviks, well, certainly Mao wasn't Jewish, but the Bolsheviks were primarily composed of people who were atheists. A significant number of them were Jewish, significant number. Trotsky being the most visible of which, and it's hard not to look at that philosophy and connect those two things, but it's just not. It's not. Communism is not a Jewish philosophy. Communism is, and socialism is not a Jewish idea either. These are just very bad ideas that have been shared by a lot of people. The reason that the Russian Revolution is so repugnant to me personally, sorry, sweetheart, is because it is so much run by intellectuals. It's a revolution of college students, is what it is. It never grew up. They just did nothing but talk about theory. So you would be a Zenobiite, or you would be a Bukharinite, or you would be a Trotskyist. And all of this stuff is about nuances on a theory from some German guy writing in London, and all of it is just plain circle jerk. That's what it is. They're sitting in their cafes in Switzerland, sitting out the first war, having a discussion about the perfect form of government without any connection to reality whatsoever. And because it was all so theoretical, if we have to kill a few 100 million people, then, the ends justify the means, right? So as long as the workers' paradise comes, and as long as we get our Dacias and our limousines and stuff, then that's what happens. Which is why one of my favorite lines about progressives is, you can show a progressive a program that's doing really well, and he'll say, well, yes, it works in practice, but will it work in theory? It is getting uglier out there, and it's worrisome to me. And I understand why it's happening, but it's still worrisome to me. Somebody's been saying that Evan Sayet, who Natasha and I are very close to, Evan and his significant other, and Evan goes right at this, talks about it, and he understands the progressive mindset better than anyone. And as DCG44S just said, every group in the world has some dumbasses, and that's a fact. There has been. Mark Twain wrote about this. Mark Twain was really very far ahead of his time in this, and Twain's argument was that the Jews had been so universally despised because they were so good at business. They were so good at it and since they had been culturally, since Christian I'm pretty sure Islamic culture as well, for most of the history, didn't allow money changing, essentially didn't allow the idea of profit. The idea of lending money for profit was just considered sacrilegious. Christians couldn't lend money or deal with money and make a profit. And that means you can't have a bank and you can't have anything. And so what happened was, since the Christians had this religious taboo against it, and Jews didn't, they had a long history of hundreds of years, if not thousands of years, of understanding. If you said Jews are obsessed with money, it's one way to put it, I suppose. But I think a more appropriate way to put it is to say that they alone in the world understood finance a long, long, long time before the rest of us did. And if you own stock today in anything, then you don't really get to blame the Jews for any problems that we've had, because they were just doing what you're doing now and what everybody's doing now, and that's making money with money. We would have none of this stuff, none of it, if it wasn't for money out there working for other money. When you build a skyscraper, people think, oh, we need so much concrete, and we need so much glass, and we need so much insulation, and we need elevators, we need this, we need that, we need air conditioning ducts, we need all these things. And you do. But the first thing you need is the money. If you don't have the money, that's not going to get built. If it doesn't get built, it's not going to run those businesses. Those businesses aren't going to exist. They're not going to turn a profit, and they're not going to pay the people that work in those businesses. And those families then are also suffering. So everybody today is benefiting from the kind of knowledge that was pretty much unique to Jews for most of the history in Europe. It's hard to blame people for being good at something when you basically said they're not allowed to do anything else. And one of the reasons that there's such Jewish influence in the beginning of Hollywood, and I suspect also that this connects to it as well. There's a book out there called An Empire of Their Own, and basically what the book says is that at the turn of the last century, in the early 1900s, you had a number of Jewish American businessmen who certainly weren't being persecuted. There were no pogroms against them, like in Russia, and they weren't having their windows smashed like in Nazi Germany. But they simply were not. They were not allowed into the country clubs. They couldn't make the connections. They were definitely segregated in a sense. They were a lot of people that just didn't want to deal with them, and so they were primarily from the East Coast, because a lot of them had come over, pretty much exclusively come over from Europe. And so they're sitting in New York and Baltimore and Philadelphia and all these other things, and they've got these business skills, but they can't really exercise them. And then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, right around 1910 or so, maybe a little bit later, not only does it's not a new business, it's a new kind of business. Movies and entertainment, mass entertainment, just didn't exist. And now all of a sudden, way, way out there in the wastelands called Los Angeles, in that nasty little stretch of desert out there, they're making movies, and the movies are making money. And the blue bloods descended from the Mayflower don't want anything to do with that, because actors, appropriately enough, I think, actually, usually weren't allowed into towns. They were kept outside and known for loose morals and unclear thinking, and is a reputation they maintain today. So basically, what this book's premise is, An Empire of Their Own, is that show business essentially appeared out of nowhere. It just arrived out of nowhere, and so they jumped on it, and you can't argue with with Louis B. Mayer and virtually all of the moguls were Jewish, but it's not pretty, and it goes against my philosophy. And if you've been watching the show long enough, it should go against your philosophy too. There are many things that are culturally true, and there are some stereotypes that are in fact based on actual behaviors. But my theory of everything is that people are individuals, and that to the degree that they're going to be judged by me or anybody else, I judge them as individuals. I know that I would much rather be in a room full of patriotic, hardworking blacks, Jews, Hispanics, and all the rest, with not a single other white face there, than be in a room that's completely lily white, with which is essentially what progressivism is: super rich white liberals. I'd be with the patriots. I don't care what they look like. I really don't. And this is why I somehow find the courage, if you'll pardon me for saying so, to go ahead and criticize things like black culture and crime rates and Black Lives Matter, because I genuinely believe in the individual. And since I believe in the individual, I'm not too worried about, I don't say it doesn't hurt, it hurts a lot, but ultimately, if I get accused of racism, antisemitism, or Semitism, or whatever, it's like, hey, I'm looking at the cards on the table, but as far as my personal life is concerned, I judge people as individuals, and I've met good people and bad people from every single possible ethnic, sexual preference, religious background you can possibly imagine. I've met wonderful, excellent, patriotic, great, hardworking Muslims, gays, Jews, everybody. And I've also met people who are not so good from everywhere. So that's my tribe. And I like to belong to people who have the same values as me, and that's what makes people alike. You know, that's what makes somebody a friend and a brother. Is, you know, it's not how they look; it's how they think. It's really, when you get right down to it, it's how they act. Okay, it's